Show must go on. Show must go on. Yeah, yeah. Ooh, inside my heart is breaking. My makeup may be flaking, but my smile still stays
So at the back end of last year, this most dweeby of YouTube channels managed to get a video with 15,000 views thanks to you guys. So thanks for your support. And the topic was simply my live rig, which rather unusually is based off a computer. I'm not entirely sure why it's still unusual, because it's still the only way that makes sense for me. Anyway, at least because of all of the cool options and power that bestows. If you're new to this idea, that last video will be linked in the comments below. It has a good explainer as to why I built a rig around a computer and what the different hardware components are. But today I want to talk about some of the things that I've learned since then. And what's great about YouTube is that it is a social media channel of sorts. You'll get some interesting comments, but sometimes you'll get some very useful sort of connections. And a couple of people told me, why are you using MainStage? And I was like, well, look, I'm in the Apple Macintosh walled garden. This thing is native app. It hasn't let me down before. And they're like, no, check out GigPerformer. It'll change how you do things. So I reached out to GigPerformer and I explained what I was doing and said, look, you know, this looks like an app for keyboard players. I mean, you know, but what I'm doing is kind of what a keyboard player would do. And I got a phone call almost instantaneously from their CEO, Dr. David Jameson. And what was interesting was, and why he was so keen to get in touch, is it turns out that David is actually from Dublin, like all good people like me. And it was just kind of interesting because he had left Ireland with his keyboard skills, those type of keyboards that you play music on, and obviously a nice doctorate in computer stuff. And he developed this app because he found MainStage wanting. Now, I was surprised to hear that a keyboard player would find that. I've had my troubles with it. I've kind of nearly just accepted because it was very stable, etc. But he had very good cause to change it because of one fundamental way of looking at how the flow of the sound goes. And it's simply this. MainStage focuses on channel faders, and the app that David and his gang of wonderfully talented developers came out with is done on patch cables, so like a pedal board. So it makes much more sense just straight out the gate. But there's more to it than that. And I spent a couple of months using it at gigs, using it at home, and now I just don't touch anything anymore. I have a quad cortex just gathering dust up here that I've been trying to make a video about for ages, because when I want to play guitar, I spring open the laptop and I have a GigPerformer session ready to go. If I'm doing guitar lessons with my daughter, I have a GigPerformer session that's designed to do that, so we can both play and run backing tracks and run drums. And at gigs, everything is just so much simpler. I just don't know why I didn't try it before. But you're going to see why it works in the context of a live gig for a guitarist, and I'm going to take you through it today. So just using my live rig. So there's a couple of things just to look at. We're going to record the screen, so I'll go back and forth between the two of them. But another piece of feedback I got was too much talking and not enough guitar. So I have the guitar on me, so we'll do a bit of all of that. And just before I get started, I just want to show you off this guitar. This is a new guitar for me. I know it looks very much like all the other guitars you ever see me play, but this is a Raymond Red Special, and I hope to do a review on this one soon. It's made by Raymond from Barcelona in Spain, and if you look very closely, it has this really cool coat of arms, bunkered coat of arms, which is cheesy as hell, but I love. So I'll be using this throughout, and for those who don't know me, I played the part of Brian May in a Queen tribute band, and there's going to be a lot of Queen references in this, but the underlying theory and the way I do things could be employed for any type of music and more beyond. What's great about GigPerformer is impossible guitar rigs become possible. So let's take a look at the computer and we'll have a look and see what type of things I've been using it for. Just looking at this view here, so yeah, just kind of to explain what's going on, actually, I'll start from this one actually. It starts like a rack unit. Now, I haven't really gone there because it's just not how my use case goes, but you've got individual rack spaces, which can be kind of like presets on a pedal or patches if you like. I just have the 2 on this one. You can see here this one and this one. I'll show you the difference between them in a moment. And within that, you have a wiring view. And the wiring view could be any number of your plugins and a few of the plugins that come with this. So I'm just going to explain my signal flow here. Now I use AmpliTube 5 running ToneX captures. And this is great, by the way, on its own. But I found, just because, like all guitarists, we're just always trying to make things better and different, that even though AmpliTube 5 has a full raft of stuff to deal with the signal after the amp, there's a couple of other plugins in IK Multimedia's universe that are actually very, very useful for getting a great guitar sound, and being able to run them as well as AmpliTube 5 has been absolutely fantastic. Plus there are plugins from other manufacturers that are also very useful. Anyway, we'll go back here for a moment. So at the very top we have our audio interface. I use the XIO. And channel 1 is hitting AmpliTube 5. You can also wire it in stereo, but there's no need to do that for AmpliTube 5. It's expecting a mono signal from a guitar generally. And then you'll see that I have it going into an audio mixer. And that was more just to split the left and right output of AmpliTube 5 into 2 different sets of left and right outputs. And if you go down the bottom, see there's the audio out for the XIO, but I have this thing. It's a global rack space. And this, dear viewer, is where the magic happens, for me, anyway, at least. So that's one unit preset. But see this little globe icon up here? If I click this, I get like what's like a master out. Now, generally when I've been talking about the floorboard effects like Tone Master Pro, Quad Cortex, Helix and all that type of stuff, my bugbear with all of them really is that the master output section is kind of insufficiently useful, or what's the word? It's not very useful, sorry, just for live work and probably even studio work, if truth be told. And the reason for that is they all just have an EQ at the end of the train. And if you go into any forum or discussion group on Facebook about these things, you'll see a lot of complaints that people get related to the Fletcher Munson curve. So in other words, you get your Quad Cortex or whichever unit you use, you'll set up a great sound at home, you take that to rehearsal and you put it up loud or at a gig and it'll sound entirely different. And that's because, and I keep talking about this, but just for anyone that hasn't heard me waffle about this before, is the way we perceive sound changes proportionate to how much louder it gets. So in other words, the sound gets louder, as your tone gets louder, the highs become exaggerated, the upper mids become exaggerated, and the very low end gets exaggerated. And you have to change that. So that's why the first piece of advice a lot of people on YouTube will give you with any digital rig is set your tones at the volume in which you use them. Now, I would argue that there's a bit more to it than that, because when you get into it, you get people saying, well, look, just put a T-shape EQ on it. So in other words, pull off all the low ends and slope out the high end. But that doesn't always work. Actually, most of the time it doesn't work. And the reason for that is that some guitar tones are just really complex. Now, I'm going after Brian May's tone, which is a normal channel of a Vox AC30 being smashed by a treble booster. And it has a very rich high end. Now, I'll just show you my live sound here. You know, so it has a sparkly clean with the guitar volume down, and as I bring it up, sort of a nice gainy but clear sort of sound, and as it opens up fully, probably have too much delay there, but you get the idea. It's got a lot of sound that is in a lot of detail in the high end. So if I was to just go, oh right, this is really screechy in my ears at the gig, and just swoop out all the high end, I'd lose a lot of how this thing works. Plus, if you are monitoring with speakers on stage, a big part of what you enjoy about the guitar is how the pickups of the guitar are interacting with a guitar speaker. And this is what a lot of people would often describe as amp in the room feel. Now, obviously, there's a different type of thing which is to do with the physics of a big speaker and all of that, and the sound and how we perceive that. But also a big part of that is that, you know, most pickups, when you put them in front of a speaker or near a speaker making the same sound, they'll pick up the sound you already made. And this causes something that's like another type of cascading overdrive effect. And that can lead to a type of feedback. Okay, waffle over. Just applying an EQ at the end of a chain is sometimes just not enough. And you can get, like the Helix has an amazing EQ where you can actually just find the problematic frequencies and notch them down a bit. And that's a good way of dealing with things. But what I like to do, and I discussed this in the last video, is ask the question, what would an actual guitar amp do? And the answer to that is, like, the speaker on your actual guitar amp would start cutting frequencies in a very soft way, but compressing them rather than notching them out, because once that information is taken away, it's just gone forever. So in other words, your speakers on your real guitar amp it's a bit like a compressor or a limiter, you know, that's got a very soft need to it. So it means that those frequencies are still there, so that they're shoved down in a particular way and at a particular speed. And what's great about this approach that I have here in front of you, and I'll just take you through it, is that I can actually do that dynamically. So in other words, instead of just putting a normal compressor at the end of the chain, which you could do, which can get you somewhere there, I look at the end of the audio frequency spectrum where a guitar speaker works. So in other words, there's no super high end being pushed through that guitar speaker. It starts to squash that down as a compressor. The bit in the middle, yeah, broadly intact. The very low end can get a bit of a push as well, but it's about the high end just being pushed down itself as opposed to the whole broad length of the signal. Right, he's off. Let's have a look. Now, so my original guitar tone has been fed into this universe, and the first thing that I have is an equalizer, and I have applied a lot of the sub bass has been removed. I have a little dip about 1 to 200 hertz. I found that's just where it loses a bit of definition as a sound, so I just do that anyway. I could have done that in AmpliTube. I probably should have done it in AmpliTube. We like to hear sounds where the mid sort of decreases. That's just a psychological thing. I don't know what the reason for it is. So I actually have a very slight dip in the mid, as you can see here. And I have a little dip in the high end where I feel that there is shrillness, which is between 3 and 5K. So it's a nice soft shape. So let's have a look what happens next. So I have two other plugins that follow it, a quad compressor and a quad limiter. And to do slightly different things, similar in some ways and not in others. So this is a compressor, but it's a compressor being applied in the mid and the shrillness of the high end and the very high end. So if you look at this frequencies I'm working at here, that's between 2 and 5 and a bit K. And it's just squashing down the bit that's just a bit sharp, but not getting rid of it, just dynamically pushing it down. So in other words, when the coin that I use as a plectrum, or the plectrum that you might use if you're a real normal guitarist, when I hit a note, the transient sound, the screech that you hear that you mightn't want to hear is that, you know, making contact with the string. And what happens is when that starts to peak in the sound, this compressor just finds that frequency and just pushes it down, so it's not, you know, making that unpleasant sound. And this is what an amplifier would do. Anyway, the limiter is doing something similar. I tend to work them together, but just slightly different. So this limiter is only working on the low end and that same frequency again, and it's just a security device just in case I do something a little bit too hard with the plectrum and I need to really brick wall it a bit. And then finally, I have the option of reverb. Now, just to explain, oh, excuse me, bring it back. I don't use reverb on stage. I use delay instead. So you'll hear a lot of delay in this signal, but that's only because the speakers that I use to monitor on stage, they're just very close to my face. You know, they're just on the floor pointing up at me. So I could use reverb, but I like to use delay, and it just gives it a little bit more of a sense of space for the guitar, and it's not as harsh when it's come back at you that way. Plus, I think on the live recordings of Queen, there is a little bit of that anyway when they remix them. For professional releases, it does give it a bit more of a hi-fi sheen. But anyway, I don't use reverb because I find reverb clouds things out. But why do I have it in the chain? It's just for when I'm at home. So I might like to use my live sound at home, but I might want to simulate a bit what it's like on stage. So I can just throw that on, stick it in a live room, and it's just a nice little thing to have, you know. So I just leave it there for those type of moments. Or sometimes I'm in a rehearsal studio that's very small and it just gives you a bit more of a sense of space. And that's really it. As I take more time with GigPerformer, I will be doing more with it. And in a moment, I'm going to show you a time where it could have saved my life if I'd known it had existed a year ago. So maybe we'll look at that next, and we're going to mix a couple of plugins and see how that goes. But before I move to that, I'm going to show you one very cool thing. We'll get out of the global mode. One of the questions that people ask me, there's a couple of questions people always ask me about this rig. One is latency. And I'd wager that my latency is faster than your Quad Cortex's latency. I haven't measured it, but it feels like it could be because this is really powerful. This laptop has got an amazing processor and I run it very fast and very hard. So we have a very small buffer and I run it at 192 kilohertz. And I explained why in the last video, but there's a couple of reasons. With ToneX, I find that I get a lot more high-end detail from the amp captures when the thing is up very loud. You won't hear that difference if you're using it at normal volumes, but when it's up very loud you do actually hear that extra sort of bite in the treble, so I do like that. But the other reason is that running at a higher sample rate makes the pitch shifting work a lot better. So in other words, the harmonizers are better able to track and are faster to track when the resolution is that high. There is a slight benefit to latency if you run at a higher bit rate like that, but it's mainly about the buffer with latency. So a lot of people ask me that anyway, so what's the latency like? And I go, yeah, that's a thing, it's not a thing for me rather. And the other question that I get asked, because with pedal devices there's always this change, this sort of gap when you change between presets. Now, very cleverly, the Quad Cortex manages this with scenes. So in other words, you set up all your amps and your effects, and one pedal would do a couple of things at once. So maybe turn on a different effect or change the parameters, and it's an instantaneous sound. And that's the right way to treat that with those pedals. And Helix does that as well, and so does the Tone Master Pro. Unfortunately, AmpliTube 5 doesn't have that yet. It has a different way of doing it, which is a little bit more convoluted. And I'm not going to go into it today because it could be a video in itself, which is you have to tell your MIDI pedal what it is that you want to have happen and assign those commands to those parameters within the plugin, which is just, it takes a while. But what you can do in GigPerformer is you can have two rack spaces, and I'm just going to change between two of them, and hopefully this works the way I want it to. So this is a sound. Now, I had a little bit of a clink there because I have my buffer running a little bit tight and I have the screen recorder going on. But generally, I don't know if you could hear it, but the sound actually comes in instantaneously and smoothly. Don't be recording your screen at the gig though, because it does cause it to go. But, you know, generally speaking, if I can do that and if I change the preset as a rack space, it just more or less instantaneously comes across. Plus, you can control how that works. I can set up a crossfade between those two settings and it very easily works. But as with all things, the trick is find the limits of your computer. Don't record the screen at the same time and it'll work smoothly. So let's have a look at a nice use case for how this might go. So last year we had a disaster in our band. Our singer got very sick with a very rare form of cancer, and for a period of time to cover some shows we had to bring a dep in from the United Kingdom. And invariably what happens when you have different singers covering material like Queen's, you'll have to do some sort of jiggery pokery to get the keys to align with the voice, and it's very difficult. On guitar, transposition isn't a big whiz. I mean, like if you're playing soul or funk or stuff like that, you just change around the keys to match whatever brass or whatever deployment you're working with. But with rock and roll it's quite difficult because the timbre of the instrument is so important, and open strings can be essential to the sound of various songs. Within Queen's oeuvre there's a lot of weird keys, a lot of songs in E flat and F and things like that might need to be traditional rock and roll keys, but a lot of the time simply detuning the guitar isn't an option because your guitar is probably something crazy and odd like this that you have to use, and you mightn't have a spare to cover between different songs with different tunings, and the whole thing can get quite messy. So my initial solution when that happened was to get the Digitech Drop, which is a great pedal, and if I wasn't doing this crazy gig that would be a very good solution because it just simply whacks the pitch down and it's perfect, tracks perfectly, sounds great. But the problem is with this, and you can't really see it here, or maybe you can, is that I have a treble booster on my strap and I use a wireless system. So a big part of the Brian May thing is the treble booster has to follow the guitar. So the pitch shifting would have to happen after the treble booster. And what that does with the Digitech pedal is it just changes the responsive impedances between your virtual amp or your real amp if you're using one. And it also just makes the tone really sag. So that didn't work in the long run. And what I had to do then was try and find another solution. So what I ended up doing was, within MainStage, I decided, right, I have Helix Native, Line 6's Helix, as I used to use the pedal. It's a great pedal, don't get me wrong, it's just not for me anymore. But the pitch shifting in it is amazing. Very often you'll see people that use an actual Helix pedal. They might like to use the virtual capo, it's called, which allows you to drop pitches evenly across the 6 strings polyphonically, so you can play chords and stuff. But It takes up a lot of DSP on that device. So the rest of your chain, your amps and stuff like that, you have to make a lot of compromises to use that. I don't have that problem because I'm using a really super high-powered computer here. So what I had to do though, because MainStage is a bit funny, is I had to create a channel in MainStage, make Helix the source, then I had to send up all sorts of send buses to try and manage the gain staging. And then I had the problem of how do I ascribe MIDI control to Helix and AmpliTube 5 so I can change tunings and presets. The whole thing was very, very difficult. I had such a hard time setting that up. If I had this time last year when that was kicking off, life would have been so much easier. So I'm going to show you how it works. So we'll go over here for a moment. So just talking about the MIDI. There's a MIDI in here and I have it marked Omni, but it could be anything. You could have numerous different MIDI sources. You could have a pedal, you could have some gadget on your guitar, you have the keyboard player doing it for you, or some other computer that's running Ableton Live. But you can drag a little cable out to it and you can send MIDI that can only apply to Helix Native, or you can send it so it only applies to AmpliTube 5. And the modern pedals nowadays for controlling this, like I use the Morningstar MC6, this fella here, I don't know if, yeah, we can see it. And you could set up any number of different MIDI channels or commands off each pedal. So I could hit a pedal and it could say, right, we're doing Killer Queen, we're going to bring it down a tone by telling Helix Native to bring it down a tone. And we want a particular set of effects and sounds for the amplifier, and we might want some phaser or something, whatever, you know. It can all be done with one click. And it means also that you're not reliant on one technology. If I was still using a Helix pedal, I'd have to use it for pretty much everything. I could probably bust in a ToneX pedal into the loop, but you know, next thing you got this really huge pedal board with lots of contingent parts. Whereas if I do it this way, I can use any number of different technologies and plug-in format to accomplish this. So let's have a listen. This is, actually we'll just go back to the first sound. So this is a big loud A chord. And if I was to have programmed this to the pedal, I could then go and just bring it down a tone. So same chord, sorry, you can see my hand there. But you can see that because I have Helix Native in the front of the signal change, I can now just polyphonically bring it down, and it doesn't do anything to the sound. It doesn't add extra latency because the guitar signal is safely transferred into the digital realm through the interface. I can still have control over my volume pot, and the treble booster responds like it would normally. And it's almost as though the guitar was tuned down, and that is just amazing. Now, again, you can do that with a Digitech drop, but if you're doing something that requires something like a fuzz pedal or a particular type of distortion pedal that has to come first in the chain, it ain't gonna work as well as this. So that's one good example of that. I'll show you one other one, actually, just again in the Queen universe. So here's one I made earlier. So what I have going on here, just to show you, this is my regular AmpliTube 5 live rig, and you can see it's kind of a stereo setup with two of my captures, which you can buy, by the way, if you have a ToneX pedal. I'll put the link down below, cheeky plug, just if you want to get these sounds. I have a lot of free stuff on tone.net, but I've also engineered some presets for the ToneX 1 pedal and the ToneX pedal that makes them, you know, really useful for live use, particularly with the Queen stuff, because that's what I do. Anyway, that's my regular chain. You can see that has 2 amps, 2 speakers, some EQ at the end, and a little bit of delay. Now, let's move over here, and here's the ToneX plugin. And very often you'll just see YouTube pull of videos about the ToneX pedal, but the plugin is still there and it's also very useful for live use. In this case, I have a capture I made of a Deacy amp. Okay, sorry, more nerd stuff. Basically, in the early 70s, Queen's bass player John Deacon found an old hi-fi speaker in a skip in London, and some old radio that people have discovered in recent years was made in Rhodesia. God, I'm not even sure what that country's called anymore, but in any case, he made a little amp out of the two of them because he was a bit of a whiz kid with the electronics. It's what he studied, and it's what he would have been if he wasn't Queen's bass player. And he made this amplifier, and then Brian May plugged a treble booster in it and found it had a particularly useful sound because it was a full range speaker. And a lot of those orchestrations you hear in Queen, they're all done, or often done, using this amp because it's a full range speaker. So what does that mean? Like I was saying earlier on, a guitar speaker will take a lot of frequency out of the guitar because frankly it needs it, particularly a distorted guitar sound. But this puts it back in, but in a very musical way, because it kind of compresses it very much like, you know, I was doing it there, but just in a very particular way. And it means that when you layer these things up, they start to sound like orchestral instruments, like strings and woodwinds. And if you do things with a tone pot or a wah, or move the mic around and put them in as layers and section arrange them like he did in a lot of songs, they sound pretty cool. Now, I'm not going to be able to do that live unless you had a lot of Deacies and a lot of guitarists playing them. But watch this. So ToneX capture of the Deacy, that works great. But now we have Quadravox. So what's Quadravox? Eventide invented the original harmonizer. Their stuff for pitch shifting is just grade A. It's amazing. And I got this plugin in a sale. It was only like 20 bucks, 20 euros, sorry, or your currency equivalent. And I have it set up here just to take the Deacy. So I have my regular sound in one bit, and I have the Deacy going into it, and it's creating a two-part harmony to go with my original sound. So let's just hear what that sounds like. So it sounds like a Queen record. And I haven't done anything with this live. I have 2 massive gigs coming up next month, and we're just off the road rehearsing for those. But I'm tempted to. I may do. It seems to be holding up very well, but it literally sounds like you've got a choir of guitars underneath you in the way that Queen would. Now, that's my particular use case. Use your imagination, and you can see that this can go anywhere. I mean, like if you were a more ambient guitarist, you could have different types of delays. You could have like a Fender Twin going into something that is making some mad equi reverb, but then have a Marshall on another channel that would be doing something to hold it all together. The sky's the limit. These are rigs that you couldn't build with pedals, or rather you could, but you'd have lots of pedals and it wouldn't be very portable, and it would be highly expensive. Plugins are cheap, and very often many of them are free. So this is the advantage of GigPerformer, is that you can actually range those things in a useful way. But even more than that, when it comes down to controlling them, passing the MIDI around the place is so easy. And I don't think it's for me to do a tutorial about that, but if someone wants me to do that, actually, if there is actually a need for that, I will do a tutorial to show how I programmed my Morningstar pedal to trigger all the different sounds. But in fairness, unlike MainStage, GigPerformer's YouTube channel is one to watch because it has loads of use cases and tutorials, and it's very inspiring. And the other thing about it is it's actually really easy to use this stuff. Once you understand the basics of MIDI, like what a MIDI channel is, difference between CC changes, control commands, and program changes, all that stuff, it's actually kind of very sensible how it all works. And this actually makes it easier. So that's really what it does. Now, I'll just show you one more sort of obtuse use of this, and then I'll wrap this one up. So let's open another patch. So I used to teach guitar. I don't do it anymore because one day I went in to teach a kid and they asked me to play a Taylor Swift song, and I had no idea who Taylor Swift was. It was a long time ago, in fairness. I know who she is now, don't at me. But basically, if I had this, things would have been a lot easier. And as it happens, I do have one pupil at the moment. My little daughter is an apprentice rock star at the moment. So let's have a look, and I'll just show you how I set up the two of us. Just before I move on to that, there is 2 inputs on the XIO. So in other words, one input's for her and the other is for me. So if you were working in a studio situation where you are teaching, you could have your student just plug into one side, and they could have pretty much any rig you would need them to have. But let's have a look how I have it set up. So again, here's the XIO. Actually, I don't need to do that. I'll just kill one of those. So I have my input going into AmpliTube 5, and I have all the Queen stuff here. In this instance, I just have the limiter on this point here because I just want it on my sound, so it's set up for my sound. I have reverb, and out it goes out to the front. But what I also have going out the front and going into the interface, and this is a little bit messy, probably could have done a better job here, is I have an audio file player. So what I can do here is I can load up backing tracks, and I can play over them, or the student can play over them. But what I also have here is, and here's the big one, you don't just have to have audio plugins in here, you could have instruments as well. So I have Easy Drummer, and it could be any of these, and I can grab a drum pattern and play it. And I can, metronomes are important when you're teaching, but drums are more fun, so I can have them play a scale, or whatever it is, or we can have a little jam with the drum beat. So I find that very good as a way of engaging them to actually play actual music. As I say, metronomes are great, but look, now we can have actual full drum kits. And similarly with the audio file player, we can get some stuff to happen here. I might treat you to a solo. What's this one? Yeah, sure, we might try this one here. So this is Queen's Show Must Go On. Unfortunately, I didn't rewind it to play the whole solo, but you get the idea. So, I mean, I can prepare those backing tracks in advance and have them there. I can then share those backing tracks with the students so they have the same context. And it's great when the pupil lives in the same house that you, but you know, even if it was for somebody else, I'd find this extremely useful. It's just so handy. And it's all there in one window. And what's great about it is because you're using AmpliTube 5 and ToneX, you know, it kind of removes that whole fashion thing. Well, the teacher's got a great guitar, teacher's got a great guitar rig, because this is a guitar rig they could have at home because it's fairly cost effective. Like the ToneX app itself, even the demo version of it is free, so you can get a really good tone for nothing. And once, you know, they have an audio interface, they'll have a good sound and they'll have confidence from that. And I couldn't do this in MainStage. I would have such a pain in the trying to put that together, and it's so much easier here. It's not even just that. I mean, like, you know, this same setup without the second setup of AmpliTube and all of that. One thing I'm going to try and get more into is live streaming. I don't know why. I'm having a midlife crisis, so live streaming is what all the cool kids are doing, and it is kind of fun. So I can't show you, but you know what an iPhone is. I'm filming on one. If you have an interface for your iPhone, because you know you'd want to do all the sound on your computer, something like one of those Zoom boxes or even just another audio interface, the newer iPhones and a lot of the Android phones will just take that as an audio source. So what you could have is you could have your GigPerformer set up, going into some speakers, wire that into the interface. You might have a microphone. I have one of these little clip-on jobs here. They're very cheap nowadays. Plug that into another channel onto the interface, plug it into your phone and onto TikTok with full glorious stereo sound. And if you're streaming, you know, part of it is talking like I'm doing now, but part of it might be showing something off, and you can queue up your backing tracks here. You can queue up your different sounds. I mean, look, the sky is the limit, and that will create very engaging live content. And really, it's not a lot of fuss. You put the phone up on a tripod, you wire the other interface into it, a couple of jack leads later, the whole thing is ready to go. And all of this stuff can be got for, you know, reasonably cheap amount of money, small sums of money. Now, I have no commercial expectations from streaming. As I say, it is more of a midlife crisis thing for me. But if I was selling courses or selling something like that, I'd be all over that. I'd be on those things anytime that I wouldn't be teaching somebody or doing other gainful work, because it is a channel that generates business. And for a younger guitarist that wants to put themselves out in the world, you know, you turn on TikTok, you'll see lots of guys with their phone microphone and some crap amp in the corner of the room, shredding away, getting a lot of views. But this way you can have deluxe stereo sound, properly mixed backing tracks, all happening in real time, you know, all through GigPerformer. So there's a lot of good uses here. And just to also say that even if you weren't using the phone, if you were streaming off the laptop using the laptop camera, that there is plugins within GigPerformer that will allow you to pipe the audio as well around that. So you could have a situation where you could have one of these clip-on mics, and this is more of a Mac thing really, but I presume there's some way of doing this with Windows, but definitely on the Mac. The mic could be an audio interface, your XIO could be one interface, and you could pipe the audio internally of both of those, mix them in GigPerformer and pipe that into a streaming app like OBS, I don't know if you know that one, or something like that, and run it up onto one of Meta's platforms or TikTok or one of those things. And you could just do it all off one machine. You know, leave the phone out of it if you like. Or if you wanted to get really posh about it, you could have like a phone piping HDMI into the computer. Oh, look here, look, there's loads of things you could do. It's just so powerful. But it's all made possible with this. And I can't do any of this with MainStage. MainStage broke my heart. But again, I was a captive to the walled garden of Apple software. They don't seem interested in it anymore. They're not updating it. I mean, if there was a situation now where Apple found a way for all of our lovely plugins to go onto an iPad, and I've been on about this before, and brought something like MainStage out onto iPad, God, that could be something. That could get rid of a lot of gig gear for me to carry around. But we're not there yet. I don't see us going there. It doesn't seem to be in their interest. Whereas GigPerformer is alive. It's being developed and redeveloped. It's built by musicians. It's built by people that are out gigging, you know, not people that sit at home taking pictures of pedal boards for Facebook groups. It's a working musician's tool. So with that in mind, I'm just going to show you a few other ancillary bits. So as you can see here, I have an audiophile player. That's actually comes with GigPerformer. So one thing that MainStage does have, it does come with equalizers and compressors that are very good. So there's a lot of bring your own gear with this, and you can't use Apple's own plugins with other platforms. But if you're a guitarist, if you've bought into IK Multimedia's universe, like if you bought ToneX, the correct way to buy stuff from IK Multimedia is in a sale, buy one of their total sets. So get the complete set of the studio stuff and you'll get ToneX and AmpliTube for like 200 quid plus VAT. You know, so you don't need it then if you do that, because that's what I've done and it worked out great for me. There's actually too much stuff in that, you won't use all of it. But in any case, there are additional plugins in this. So let's have a look. So there are numerous mixers which allow you to duplicate sound and port it around the place for different things and different outputs. But if I go under this menu here, you can see they have some system stuff like gain and balance controls, mono versions of them, different ways of piping stuff out to the master sort of rack space, different types of media players. So you can actually play MIDI files and stream audio into it. There's lots of stuff for MIDI because, you know, it was built by a keyboard player, but you really, I just don't see myself using most of these things, but sometimes you will have to, you know. You might need the MIDI monitor to make sure that you're doing stuff right when you're programming stuff. I use that just to see that everything's being passed the right way, because people make mistakes. The other stuff though, I'm not that nerdy to do it. But the level of craziness that's possible with this just keeps going on. Like one app that I think is still in beta, but is still quite useful that I like to use is MidiGuitar. And I'm going to finish up with something on MidiGuitar, and if there's any questions about this, I'll happily make another dozen videos about this app. It's so cool. So you just put them in the comments below and I'll get to it. So let's switch guitars, because it's not really a treble booster thing, and I'll just show you some tricks with MidiGuitar. So what I've got here is just AmpliTube. So I'll just disconnect this for a moment so we don't ruin the surprise. And I'm just getting a sort of a dumble sound here. I might just give it a bit more volume because we're going to have something mad happen here. So if you search around YouTube, you'll see this plugin. It's kind of sorcery. MidiGuitar 3 is in beta, and when it comes out, it's going to be kind of revolutionary because it tracks very well. What does that mean? Well, just first of all, I'm going to drag this lead here. So this is my second input from my interface into MidiGuitar, and we'll open it up and have a look at it. So this is the beta version, and look, there's a lot going on here, and this video isn't about MidiGuitar, but what it's actually doing is it's going to take the sound, polyphonic sound of the strings of this Les Paul, and it's going to turn it into MIDI, basically. You'll see that magic trick in just a moment. And what happens then is, you see it's an orange cable because it's MIDI. It's going into this plugin Sky Keys, which I really like, because it's just, I don't like playing around with presets on synthesizers. I don't know what I'm doing really, you know. But this thing's great because the sounds are, they're very creative, very fun. Yeah, here, I'll just play something, you'll see what it does. Now, I have the synth sound quite prominent there, but if you really think about what's possible here, theoretically I could get this MIDI pedal and I could set it up to hold the chords. So in other words, I could play that E minor and hold it, and that could just be that. And then I could just introduce the real guitar sound into it and solo over it. I just really haven't done that yet, but even just on spec, just being able to have both of those sounds at the same time is quite cool. So I have that quite prominent. So what I'll do now is I'll just lower down the sound of the synthesizer and higher up the sound of the guitar a bit. And you can see that you can create just very lovely, lush textures without too much work. So like, we've got lots of reverb and stuff on the guitar, but we can have that underlining synth sound as well, then creeping underneath it. All I'm using there is the software and the guitar and the interface. I don't know how you do that with pedals. I mean, you can do stuff with MIDI pickups and stuff like that, but you wouldn't have the same selections of sounds. I'm just using that plugin. I could have used any plugin, and plugins are where the most diversity of sounds come from. Okay, I think I made the point. GigPerformer rocks. Buy it. But don't just buy it. Have your plugins ready to go. There's plenty of free ones out there. I'm going to come back to this again. Just when I'm looking at my next video, it's probably going to be something about how you can do this type of work with a laptop, because the last one, I have my own reasons for using a Mac Mini, and to be honest, since I made that video, they brought out another Mac Mini which isn't as useful for that, so the next time I update the rig, I'll probably have to use a laptop. But you know, one thing is going to be at the core of all of this, and it will be GigPerformer. It is amazing. Check it out.